Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.
So I am a photographer. I mean, when I was in college, I was in a dark room and it was my favorite place to be. And obviously there has been an evolution as far as photography is concerned. And I have changed the way I shoot, the way I present photographs. But for me, photography has always been just a precise moment in time and something that won't necessarily happen again. I think my relationship has changed just because, like you said, we're so inundated with images all the time now that the craft has changed, the relationship to it, the job itself, like being a photographer, is much different now. I think it's more accessible, which is good. And my cameras have gotten smaller and smaller over the years as well. I used to schlep all of my gear all around the world, and I don't do that as much anymore, but I would definitely still consider myself a photographer.
Molly Hayden. Wicked. First of all, okay, thanks for joining me on the podcast. Your photos will be on the website. They're going to be just sort of displayed on in the YouTube clips. Like they're there for people to see. But basically, we're going to use these 4 photos to guide a kind of conversation, to learn about how you spend your time, how you make sense of the world, and how, the point of the podcast is to inspire people to make every second count, right? That we're allotted a very finite few seconds of life, and how do we spend them? So thank you so much for joining me, Molly. Thank you.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Wicked. Okay, so just for some background, the way we met is that my sister said, "Oh, you have to talk to Molly." I'm like, "Great." And I was in Savannah at the time, Savannah, Georgia. And then she connected us. And you, though, so I'm now in Hong Kong and you are just a skip away. Where are you right now?
I am in South Korea, about an hour south of Seoul. We moved here in 2021 from Savannah. So I lived in Savannah for 6 years. That's how I met your sister. My son was born there. So I definitely have a connection, but I am not from there.
Wicked. Where did you grow up? I'm assuming U.S.
Yes, I am an American. I grew up on the Illinois side of St. Louis, Missouri. So Missouri, Illinois.
Okay. Nice. Okay, well, let's go into your first photo. You're a photographer, so I am so excited to see, because when it's a treat because I have people who aren't photographers, but when I get photographers, it's kind of like going to a Michelin starred restaurant. I know I'm going to eat something really yummy.
I have to remember what I sent you.
Okay, that happens. That definitely happens. This one's called Haenyeo Diver. I think I said that correctly. And first of all, it's a beautiful, beautiful day. No clouds in the sky. In the background, you can see kind of what's a rocky shore. There's a kind of a lagoonish sort of thing, but it's not very warm because there's a woman walking she's in a full body wetsuit. So the water's probably pretty cold. She looks kind of Japanese. I assume Haenyeo is either Japanese or Korean.
It is Korean. The Haenyeo divers are a class of women that have been around for quite some time, and they are women divers. So on the island of Jeju, it is a South Korean island. These women are the matriarchs of their family for generations. They have been the breadwinners, and they fish. They free dive, basically. So they're going down. They can hold their breath for an incredible amount of time, and they dive, they gather all of the fish, and then they sell it at markets. During the occupation and the wars, a lot of the Haenyeos went actually to the Soviet Union at the time to work and dive, and they are absolutely incredible. And this particular photo was taken in March, so it was pretty cold. But this particular art is kind of dying out. So all of the Haenyeo are of the older generations, and the younger generations aren't adapting this lifestyle because it's very hard. But these women can like hold their breaths for minutes, like up to 7 minutes. It's really incredible. And this particular photo that I took, the woman just looked so happy, and I think it was because I was so happy because I had read about these women. I had just finished a book prior to going to Jeju, and when I saw them, it was probably the only time in my life I have actually fangirled on someone. Like, no celebrity, no musicians, but when I saw the Haenyeo, I was just so excited to see them and meet them, and this woman just matched my tone and my excitement so well the moment that I snapped the photo, and it was just incredible to see them.
So, are you okay? So, just from what you're saying, so how? I mean, are you a photojournalist? How much of your life is to go and visit people to photograph them? Because that's a very specific way of spending your time.
So that used to be my occupation. It is not currently. Since we moved over here, I do not work for a newspaper, but I have in the past. Like, that was my job, to go and visit people, to write about them, to photograph them. So the 4 photos that I sent you have basically just been on our personal travels, but I still have that particular eye. And I write about it for like personal documentation for my son, who is 8 at the time. He was 6 years old when we first moved to Korea. That was during COVID. So we had a 2-week quarantine, and he spent his 6th birthday in quarantine. And at the time, he just thought that when everyone turned 6 years old, they moved to Korea. He thought that that's what just the world did. So that used to be my job. We are over here for my husband's job. He is in the same kind of industry. But all of these are our personal travels. But I still have always had that photojournalist eye. If you'll notice, every single one of the photos that I gave you have people in them, because I am just so enamored about the way that people live in different places, different cultures, because there's so much to learn from that. And seeing these women was such an inspiration, because they are probably the toughest, or one of the toughest group of women in the world.
Okay. Well, that's a big claim. That's a huge claim to say.
Yeah. I mean, there's well, historically speaking, there are other matriarchal societies, obviously, but not in Korea specifically.
Right.
So it's really interesting to see them, at least in my worldview, those that I have, witnessed.
Yeah. So, like, one of the pillars, I guess, of the podcast, because it's where my interest goes, is, excuse me while a helicopter flies by. One of the pillars is strong women, right? And so you're there. You make this sort of journey to go to find them. I mean, is it very far from your place? And I mean, was that the whole point of why you went out there? Like, what is the background of this particular visit?
So Jeju is a small island off of the peninsula of South Korea. So where we live, it was a flight, and it was a pretty easy flight. And then there are a particular area on the island. Jeju is not very big. So I did seek them out that day. I wouldn't say that's the whole reason we went to Jeju. Jeju is just a really, interesting island. It was just travel, exploration. But I made a point of going to see these particular women while I was there. And there's also specific restaurants that solely buy from the Haenyeo divers. So you're getting this fresh catch every day that is, very specific to this cultural phenomenon.
Okay. So it's so weird for me to kind of meet people like this through the podcast, because my main, mission or impulse is just to go, okay, well, how do you make sense of the world? And like, who are you? And so, Molly, how did this happen? Because first of all, being in Savannah, for example, I met a whole bunch of people who, and I mean like a lot of people who had never even left the state, right?
Mhm.
So, what even drew you out of, did you say St. Louis? No, sorry. But anyways, to Savannah and then to Korea, South Korea. I mean, like, good on you. Well done. Like, what is that thing in your brain that between like you and your husband said, well, we're just going to, like, the world is our oyster. We're just going to seek opportunities. So you're like, what is that?
So I moved from St. Louis to Hawaii, and that's where I met my husband.
Oh,
He and I moved to Germany. We lived there for 6 years, then we moved to Savannah, and then we moved to South Korea. And like,
listen to you guys.
so I have always really been interested, but like when I was growing up, we didn't travel the world. There wasn't the means for it. And so
Mhm.
I remember I didn't even get on an airplane until I was 15 or 16 years old. And that was when I went to Florida with a friend. The first
Mhm.
time that I was able to go out of the country, I think I was around 19 or 20, and I went by myself. And that was a time, in the late 90s, early 2000s, where you could pay $50 for a standby flight and you would go to the airport and you would wait and you would see if maybe
Oh,
you could get
wow.
to Europe. And so I did a lot of solo travel at that time. And for me personally, like the short answer is I feel most comfortable in my life when I'm slightly uncomfortable. So when there
I know that.
is a piece of a puzzle or something that I have to figure out where there is no room for complacency, then I am inspired and I feel more comfortable. I think
Mm.
a lot of people, they look at our travels, and I, of course, recognize how privileged I am and how it looks from the outside, how lucky I am, but it comes
It's
down
work.
to it's work and it's a choice.
Yep.
So we made this choice. It is a conscious choice to uproot our lives and try something different. So when we made the choice to move to Korea, my we had two job offers, two opportunities. One was to go back to Germany, which I love living in Europe. And a lot of people questioned why we would turn that down. And we actively chose South Korea because we had never lived or explored this part of the world. And while I
Nice.
love traveling, I really think that if you put roots down in a community like 5 years, then you can figure it out. It goes
Hmm.
beyond the surface to something a little bit deeper, and you pick up on those values and ideas. And some of them are arbitrary. Like before I moved to South Korea, I had never used kitchen scissors, and now I will never not use kitchen scissors. There's that you really do pick up, and I feel like my life, like, why haven't I been doing this the whole time? It makes things so much easier. Why do you have a knife when you can use kitchen scissors? So,
Molly, you're a weirdo. I love it.
I mean, there are just these like different things that you pick up, different. And now that I'm a parent, this is the first time I've lived overseas as a parent. You kind of see how parenting is different and
Hmm.
um, how people are treated. Like there's a very Confucius mindset here in South Korea, and the way that they treat children and the elderly
Hmm.
is very different than
Right.
how the U.S. treats both of those groups of people. So
Yep. Yep.
it's I mean, it sounds cheesy to say like I'm a student of the world, but really um, putting myself in these moments and opportunities really helps me continue to grow as a person, and it keeps my mind open, which I think is very important in a vastly fast-paced changing world.
For sure. For sure. Okay. Well, we're gonna move along to the next photograph, but I just want to say that it's really great in this one photo of the diver. Yeah, and I love the fact that, and I've said this before to other guests. It's like if you put yourself in my or the listener's sort of seat, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know where you're taking us. So we're going on a trip with you, and just listening to you talk, I know the next photo has got to be pretty crazy. Oh, look at that! Nice. Okay, so I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but you called it Cha Cha Mong Village, Vietnam. Okay, so basically, it's in the close foreground. Seems to be a girl or young woman, kind of westernish, because all you see is her back in kind of a t-shirt and bluish t-shirt, bluish pants, holding
So
onto
that
a
is my
walking stick of
7-year-old
sort.
son, just so you know.
Oh, okay, sorry. And then great hair, and then
So
there's somebody's standing on. It's on a hillside where there's somebody holding what looks like a umbrella on their shoulder, wearing a sort of a cap. It's very green, and it's hillsides, and it's quasi jungle. This is very reminiscent of Hong Kong, where I live now, actually. And there's it's not a proper water buffalo, but it's one of those cows with a back sort of sweeping horns. Oh, they have them in the Philippines. I don't remember the name of this particular cow. Not as big as a massive water buffalo, but still not massive. And it's on the very lush hillside. It's one of those skies where it's probably has rained or it will rain. So yeah. What is this?
So first, I want to speak to when you said girl versus boy. What I find really humorous, every time we travel in Southeast Asia, everyone thinks my son is a girl. And it's supposed to be a compliment, and it doesn't bother him one bit. It doesn't bother us one bit. But we have had like playful arguments with people who are like, that is not a boy. Like, I swear, boy. The other day, he walked into a men's room at the train station, and the woman who was in there cleaning was like yelling at him to get out, and like came out, and I had to explain to her in Korean, like, no, boy.
That's funny.
So I think it's, he does have longer hair, which is like culturally, you don't see a whole lot of that in Asia. And I think just, he has an angelic face that everyone says, it just like reminds them of the feminine. So I think that's,
well,
yeah.
In the photo, he's not, you can't see him. Like he's small and kind of in the foreground, but not. Yeah. So listen, I'm sure your son is very beautiful, but all I can see is the hair and from the back. So
yeah,
beautiful hair,
absolutely.
great hair.
I mean, it doesn't bother any of us. So that particular photograph was taken in October of 2022 in Sapa in Vietnam. And
nice.
A lot of times when we travel, so Sapa is in the north. A lot of times when we travel, like obviously when we travel, we are going to be tourists. That's just how it is. We are white Americans traveling around Southeast Asia. We do not fit in. We are tourists. But we try to book our travel in order to experience the workaday or day-to-day life of people that live there. So we booked a 3-day trek with the Hmong tribe. So if you're not familiar with the Hmong tribe, they were a nomadic tribe. And there are still a lot, like ethnically, there are still a lot of Hmongs today. And Cha-Cha was her name, our guide. And what she was telling me is that I don't exactly know when, but Vietnam made it illegal for them to travel. For them to be nomadic tribes. So they settled in Sapa, which is, northern Vietnam. So what you're seeing is just part of our walk. She did call it a water buffalo. It might have a different name, but the buffalo just kind of roam around. And at one time she walked up and she's like, oh, that's my buffalo. And there was no particular markings on it to even know, but she's like, oh, I know my buffalo. And that particular buffalo ended up coming back. So we stayed at their house for one night. We stayed at her mom's house one night and her brother's house. We stayed at these various houses during this trek. And I mean, they cooked us amazing food. Everything is on an open fire. There's no refrigerators. There's no running water. It was very bare bones, but it was very interesting for me. And I think exposing my son to that, that a lot of these tribes, they have very little possessions.
Hmm.
The bed we slept on was very simple. It had mosquito net, and ours was kind of like the fancy part of
Yeah.
the home. It's
Yep.
all dirt floors. There's no real furniture beyond like tiny little plastic chairs, and but it was so lovely, and it was they and everyone seemed so unbelievably happy. The kids were happy. My son was just playing with everyone, and you realize in those moments, Cha Cha did speak a little bit of English, and she had learned it over the years from taking tourists on these treks. But like there is no need for language like when you're in specific or certain situations. Like my son had no problem
Hmm.
playing with all of the kids. I don't know like what they were playing. They would find some sort of stick and I mean play with that for hours, and
Sure.
it was really fascinating, and I really enjoy exposing him to that, and like letting him realize like we have entirely too many things in our apartment, and then you go here and there's just like not a need for it.
Right, right. Well, so one of the things that, okay, so the fact that you're American and like, because, so for example, when I went to Savannah and I meet people and I hear like there's a lot of the background assumptions, right? That the people I met through my sister and her friends and all this stuff is because it's just the soup that you swim in, right? Then I can sort of imagine you going to Vietnam and then carrying with you, even if it's subconsciously, part of like how does Vietnam as a country fit within your understanding of being either a traveler, but also trying to kind of learn about this culture that which is so far away from the U.S. and is so intimately linked to the U.S. in a way. Was that even a dimension of your travels, or are you just like, well, it was a different time, it has nothing really to doesn't really speak to you directly?
So I try to do my due diligence when I go to a country to kind of learn about its history, and I think that
Hmm.
helps to see things in present day knowing that. And one of the things, really, both traveling around Asia and when I lived in Europe, it made me realize how young and naive our history, our own history, and our own culture is. I mean, I would
Hmm.
see these artifacts and ruins that were so old it went beyond my realm of reality,
Hmm.
because it's not something that you learn in American history because it didn't necessarily exist or it wasn't taught.
Yeah.
So I do kind of take that, and that helps kind of open my mind to what it is. And it's just the realization that people and cultures do things differently, and that's okay. It's not
Oh, for sure.
better or worse, it's just different. There are things that, like, obviously, I feel like the knowledge that we know could help them, and then there's the knowledge that they bring that, like, why haven't we adopted this system? Like, we
Hmm.
can learn so much about each other.
Just I have to interrupt by saying kitchen scissors. Sorry.
Kitchen scissors, yes. I mean, but without like losing our identities, I think is the
Yeah.
important part of that. Like you can still have your culture and
Yeah.
identity, but just like learn the things from each other and how to make things work and how to just care for society and each other better.
Okay. This is like very interesting to me in that. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to geek out. What kind of cameras do you shoot with now?
So I have a Canon Mark III, and are you still there?
I think the call dropped just as you're starting to talk about what cameras you shoot with.
Yeah, I have a Samsung S22 Ultra, and it shoots raw files. So I'm able to manipulate those photos before and post production. So a lot of them have, and really that's just because of travel. I used to schlep my gear all over Europe, and all over everywhere. And, when you're trying to pack light and you're backpacking, I want to keep it as light as possible.
So where did you learn photography? Self-taught, or did you go to school? Like how did you get so deep into photography?
Well, I did take photography classes in college, but again, I was in a dark room. But you still learn composition and everything that goes along with it. As far as Photoshop, I really am self-taught, and I just learned by doing. I'm a visual learner. I tend to, especially in my youth, I tend to find people who are doing the job that I want to do. And then I work for them or intern for them or buy them coffee and ask them a bunch of questions.
You're amazing.
That's how I tend to learn. I've never been great at institutionalized education. I think that, I don't think it's for everyone. I think that I wish that as a culture, we put more energy into like trade schools or really, educating people where they are, or how they learn. And, and other cultures do a bit of that.
Yeah. Well, how about we take that as the cue to move on to a new culture, where we'll see what's in the next photo.
Sounds great.
By the way, I have to interrupt myself to say, Molly, I really appreciate you. I really appreciate how you speak, how you talk about photography, and yeah, you seem really cool. This is fun. This is great.
Thanks so much.
Boom! Mongolia farmer. Okay, so this photo is a woman who's seated on something like a plastic little thing, but she's basically at ground level, and she's surrounded by, let's say, 100 goats. There's a bit of a corral made out of wood. There's a kind of, it doesn't look quite like a yurt, but there's some kind of building-ish. It's overcast day. The sun is kind of, well, it's out, so you can't really see it, but there's some clouds, some thick clouds above. You can just about see the green kind of flatlands behind, but the majority of the image is these goats corralled with a woman, and it looks kind of cold outside, like probably I don't know, 15, 20 degrees Celsius. Lots of goats in Mongolia. So you got to Mongolia. It's amazing.
We did. That was probably, one of my absolute favorite trips. I have never in my life seen such like vast, sprawling land. Like you stand in the middle of Central Mongolia and you can see for miles and miles, and it is incredible. That was another trip where we did homestays. So we did about an 8-day trip staying with 3 different families. It was actually longer than that, probably about 12 days. We stayed with 3 different families. So we would stay like 3 nights with one, 3 nights with another, 2 nights. And this was one of the families. And all of them were farmers in some capacity. So this was obviously a goat farmer. And Mongolia, because this was in summertime and it was very cold for us, but like they were all like fairly dressed. So this was, I think, in the middle of June or July. And they, and this is what I was talking about earlier, how we always want to get a glimpse of the workaday. So they are farmers, and it is very hard work. They are up early, every single one in the family, all of the kids, they have a job. We went to one family, they had 2-year-old twins along with 3 older children, and they were butchering a goat, and the 2-year-old twins were like holding the legs of this goat while they cleaned out its innards. Like every member of the family works, and it is hard work. But they also play, and they're also really happy. And there was another example of my son who was able to play with them. We stayed in gurs, which is the Mongolian word for yurt. And my husband and I kind of joked it was like gur TV, because we would sit there and we would just see the kids running back and forth and playing. And then they would go and do their chores, and my son would go and help them with their chores. They eat a lot of mutton, lamb in Mongolia. It was a very meat heavy diet. I have never wanted a salad so bad in my life while I was there, but it's the environment. And all of the families that we stayed with are also nomadic. So they move every season. They don't move
Hmm.
too far, within like, a couple of kilometers, maybe 10 kilometers max. But it's so their livestock has different pastures, and some are by rivers, or they move, so they have access to water, and the gers can be taken down, packed up, moved, and put back up within a day.
Okay.
They run really like such a tight ship, and this is a choice. They have a lot of
Hmm.
families. Their children are usually sent off during the school season. They go to Ulaanbaatar, or the big city. They stay with host families and they get an education, and then they come back to their families in the summertime, which is when we were there. So that's why all of the children were there as well. But this is very much a choice for them, and a lot of them have a guest ger, so they do open up their home to travelers. We had a driver and a guide, and we
Hmm.
really learned a lot from them as well. I still keep in touch with the guide. She and I talk a lot. Like, we've really created these relationships, these international relationships. She teaches English at her local school, and then she does this in the summer. She was a Fulbright scholar.
Oh,
She
wow.
studied in the U.S. for a while. We've met so many just
Wow.
incredible people. But yet, they live so simply, and it's just fascinating.
So you're the third person on the podcast who has sort of highlighted and showcased something from Mongolia. One woman was actually Mongolian, so she actually moved to Hong Kong from there, and yeah, so it's interesting how landscape impacts on you, right, and shapes you in a way. And so hearing you in terms of your response, right, to say like, yeah, it's like you haven't been to a place where it's just so open and big. Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. So I have to kind of pull in something else though, which was you have a link to writing. So do you write about your experiences as well, or like how else do you share the experience?
I definitely do write, and really it's for documentation purposes only. I could probably do a little more scouting and maybe sell to different magazines, but I haven't been doing that. For me, this has just been a time for very personal travel and keeping a journal of sorts, with documentation. I also, put it out into the world for people on various groups or Facebook page for people who I know want to experience this. So I will often write something up with all of the links, the agencies I've used. That is one thing I will say that differs. In European travel, I find much easier. Like, obviously, you can get on a train and you're in a different country in an hour. Here, I have
Hmm.
used more guides and more like personal guides or travel agencies more than I have in my entire life. That has never been, I've always been a DIY traveler, but I find the learning curve in Southeast Asia to be a little different. Even after living in Korea for 2.5 years, I still have to ask my Korean friends like very specific questions. I still
Hmm.
haven't figured it out. The learning curve is still very large. So I do that
Sure.
to kind of help other people, or at least make travel more accessible to other people, because I think a lot of times people disregard Southeast Asia, especially in America, because it is so vastly different. And I think that can intimidate and scare
And
people a little bit.
far.
And far, yeah, you're right. But people are going to Australia,
For sure. And like there is something, so in terms of why how I ended up in Hong Kong was my wife and I were living in Montreal, and it's freezing February, right? And so it's just like the worst. And so we said, if we could be anywhere and do anything, where do we want to be? And so we wrote down about 20 cities, and then Hong Kong was at the top of the list. We moved out, And so that's 20 years ago. But there's something interesting that's very human in some humans, which is I'm going to get out of my comfort zone and I'm going to, be resourceful and create authentic or great experience or whatever it is, however you call it, in this, foreign land, right? Which for you, I mean, actually, you say you started flying a little bit later, but actually, you've been a traveler from a very young age, where you'd go solo traveling.
Correct.
If somebody who's listening who is in, who's never left their home wherever they happen to be, right? Why can you put it into words, like how what the draw is to pull you out to be more of an explorer?
I think it's innate. I think some people are homebodies, and that's okay. I have like members of my extended family who are like, who think that my lifestyle seems exhausting. And really, that's how I feel about staying at home. So I think it's innate. It's who you are as a person.
I love that somebody who doesn't travel is going to hear this, and you're swinging these very long arcs, and I love it. I love it. Super inspiring. Let's go on to your next photo. Okay, so this fourth photo is I love Thailand. I just love Thailand. And so it's a close crop photo of a Thai train, not looking especially modern. It looks like it's probably in the north sort of style, or way down south. There's a officer of some sort, maybe a conductor, maybe a police officer, maybe military. I guess we're talking about the train, right? So is the last sort of thing where he's, there, and that's just his world, and how you sometimes feel just the close cropped thing. You don't need to see all the details of the environment to really get a slice of this person's life. So I guess the question is, from your training, in terms of what you notice and how you notice things in the world, like, you spent many years as a photojournalist, and so how does that inform your interpretation of your of experience? Like how do you bring that into making sense of the world as you go through foreign landscapes or different landscapes?
I think I have always been kind of a natural observer. And so that informs my everyday. I can step back and really look at a scene and piece it together before I act. This, like, for example, when I'm in a new country and I go into a restaurant, I will see how everyone else is eating, and then I know how to do it. This was very helpful first time I had Korean barbecue, or some other dish, just how they are doing it, and so I know how to approach it, because everything has a learning curve. There are people who will jump right in a scene, and there are people who will step back and observe before doing that. And I have always been the latter. Mm-hmm. And I noticed my son is also the latter. And I think that kind of helps us absorb the world a little bit before experiencing it.
Mm-hmm. You still there?
Yeah, I am. Sorry.
Okay. This has been one of the most technically trying thing. Do you live in a very remote village in Korea, or it's like outside
Not
of Seoul?
All. I live in a high-rise apartment, and usually my internet is fine. I mean, I'm in Korea. Korea has some of the best uh, fast internet in the world. So.
Well, maybe it's just a shitty day for me. Yeah. Okay, so how do people see your work? I mean, like, because have you downshifted your work? Like, are you still about putting your work out there? Like, are you still doing a creative project? How do people get to experience more of your take of the world?
That's a great question, and I feel like I used to be more active in the art, and work part of it. And the last couple of years of being here, I've kind of calmed down a little bit. That doesn't mean that I'm not slowly gathering all of this documentation for a future project, but I don't necessarily know what that looks like just
Mm-hmm.
yet. I do a lot on social media, and a lot of that has to do with I have a son, and my family is so far away, so this helps them keep up with my world as well.
Yeah.
When we lived in Europe, Jeremy, my husband, and I had a blog, which we seems very, early 2000s these days.
Yeah.
So we don't have anything right now. I think I put it out there kind of low key for now, just so people can access it if they want to. Again, like you said, people are so inundated, and so there's so many people trying to do things, and that makes me very happy. I'm excited that there's so much creativity in the world, but that also means that there are so many different ways to ingest that creativity, and that can become extremely overwhelming.
Yeah.
So if I were to move forward with any of this, I want to be extremely thoughtful of the product, not just for me, but for the people who are suspects and like sometimes unknowing suspects in my work. A lot of times I do ask people, if I can take their photographs. I think that is important. Other times it's just a quick moment that I happen to capture. And, at times I think I got lucky with the capture, but I also am trained, so I kind of know what I'm doing. That's a really long answer to say I don't know quite yet, but there's always something brewing inside of me. I just don't know what form it will take in the future.
I know your type. I know because it's me. I have that as well in me. I love your photographs, and they're going to be on the website and all this stuff, and on YouTube. Yeah. So Molly, I just want to say thank you very much for joining me, and I have to apologize for the fits and starts of the recording.
Not a problem.
Okay.
It all worked out in the end.
Yes, you're right. And I hope to actually see you in person in Savannah, because in the weirdest way, it's like isn't it weird that you could feel that it's like, to me it's exotic, like because I'm from Montreal, I am born in Israel, grew up in Montreal, I live in Hong Kong. So when I go to Savannah, it's full on, it's across the board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. It's a unique experience, and like I think there's so many interesting people there from so many different like walks of life with so many experiences, and yet they all just mesh together so well. And that doesn't happen in a lot of places.
Yeah.
And so I think Savannah is unique. You have these expats who have lived all over the world, and then people who grew up there and are so, dedicated to Savannah and have friends that they've known since they were born, and they all just come together, and it's really unique and special.
Well, okay. Well, Molly, thank you so much for joining me. And I wish you and your son and your husband all the best, and keep traveling. This is great.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.
Oh, baby, I like